Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's CoSN webinar on meeting the needs of students without home internet access. I am thrilled to be helping to moderate this webinar today. Digital equity is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I know that our presenters today are very passionate about, and hopefully you will be able to pick up some ideas and strategies for how you can meet the needs of students without home internet access in your communities. Marcy, can you advance the slide? For those of you who may be new to CoSN, we are the premier professional association for district technology leaders, and our mission is to provide those leaders with the management, community building, and advocacy tools that they need to succeed. And of course, this webinar is part of a series, and this is just one of the many ways in which we try to provide value for our members. Advance the slide. Today's presenters are the all-star rock star team of digital equity school leaders. I'm very excited to have with us today Steve Langford, who is the Chief Information Officer of the Beaverton School District in Oregon. We have Diane Dorsch, who is the Chief Technology and Information Officer at Green Bay Area Public Schools in Wisconsin, and Rob Dixon, who's the Executive Director of Information Management Systems for Omaha Public Schools in Nebraska. And they are going to share with you the stories of how they are addressing the homework gap in their districts. And I'm going to start with just a little brief overview of the topic. Go ahead and advance the slide. Just to give you a little context for the homework gap, the U.S. Department of Education released a report in April of this year called Student Access to Digital Learning Resources Outside the Classroom. And based on data gathered from the census, what they discovered is that 80% of 8th graders reported using a computer at home for schoolwork on a weekday. But they found some interesting trends and concerning trends with regard to home internet access. First, they found that students in rural areas generally have more limited internet access than students in suburbs, cities, or towns. And they also discovered that students living below the poverty threshold have the lowest rate of internet access, but also that even within the different socioeconomic groups, there are additional gaps among students of different poverty levels and racial ethnic groups. So within any given socioeconomic level, there are going to be gaps between for instance, white and Asian students and other students of different racial ethnic groups. So this is a problem that is nationwide in lots of different areas and doesn't have any particularly easy solutions. If you can go ahead and advance the slide, Marcy. There are many causes for the homework gap in both rural and urban areas. Just to briefly touch on them, one is that high-speed broadband isn't available. This is especially a problem in rural areas. Pew Research recently found that 58% of rural Americans say that internet access is a problem in their communities, and 24% say that it is a major problem. And in fact, next slide. Just yesterday, I had tweeted a link to the Pew Research article, and I got this response from Benjamin Gleason, in which he was sharing how he lives in Ames, Iowa, which is a university town, and he's paying $45 a month for DSL service. So this is not something that's even a challenge that's even limited to remote rural areas. This is something that this is a challenge for schools and students in many different rural areas. Next slide. The report also found that the two primary reasons that school-age children didn't have internet access at home was that either access was too expensive or that families didn't see the need. And I think that this brings up an important component of our digital equity discussions as you're looking to address the needs in your district. And I know our presenters are going to address this as well. It's important that you not just address the access considerations in terms of making sure that people have access to the internet, but it's also important that you ensure that school families understand the need for internet access. and why it's important and how it can support their their child's education. And I know our presenters will talk about their efforts specifically in this area with community outreach to help school families understand why internet is important and help them develop the digital literacy skills that they need in order to support their children and their education. Next slide. So just to remind you, when we were talking about digital equity and inclusion, there's 3 different pillars of the digital equity school. There are devices, is connectivity, and there's digital literacy. And a lot of times students may have access to a device, or they may report having access to a device, but it's often important to remember that that device may only be a cell phone. So that certainly has implications if you are assigning homework that requires online tools, making sure that they are available on mobile tools, and also understanding the need to provide devices for students as well. Next slide. So the last thing before I turn the webinar over to our fabulous presenters is I want to mention CoSN's Digital Equity Toolkit. The toolkit is designed to provide strategies, examples, and best practices of how school leaders are addressing the homework gap in their school communities. In fact, I believe all of our presenters today are highlighted in some way, shape, or form in the Digital Equity Toolkit, but they are not the only ones. There is no silver bullet to addressing issues of digital equity in any community, and hopefully this toolkit will help serve as a guide for you to help find out what's working in different school communities and figure out what's going to be the best combination of solutions for the homework gap in your community. And that is available at cosn.org/DE Toolkit. And now I would like to turn over the presentation to Steve Langford, who's going to share about the digital equity and inclusion efforts in the Beaverton School District.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It is great to be with you all and sharing on a topic I think that's very important for all of us. So I'm going to take just a few minutes and share a bit about our journey in the Beaverton School District over the last few years. And our journey really begins with us being blissfully unaware of the problem of digital equity. Back in 2014, we were very fortunate in that our community passed a bond with a significant investment in technology. And there are 3 strands to that really began us on this path. And the first in the middle there was around infrastructure. We had a crumbling and inadequate infrastructure for student learning using digital tools. And so we very intentionally began our journey with building out infrastructure to support our digital transformation. The second strand of that was around the classroom technology. It needed to look different. And specifically, we wanted students using devices, digital tools in a different way than they had in the past. And then the third piece of our journey, the beginning of our journey, really was around reimagining what instructional resources and curriculum could look like, coupled with an infrastructure that worked and devices in the hands of students. And so that was 2014. If you want to advance the slide, Marcy. If we fast forward 2 years later, we had built out the infrastructure. We deployed 32,000 Chromebooks and almost 10,000 iPads. And we were Chromebooks 1-to-1 in grades 4-12, and the students were taking them home in grades 6-12, and we were 4-to-1 iPads in K3. I mentioned the digital resources down below at the bottom of the slide there. We started investing in tools for students to learn differently. Seesaw, we were heavily invested in Google. We had a number of resources and available for students. We invested in a learning management system. It was quickly adopted in grades 6-12, and so that we were moving very, very quickly. If you want to go to the next slide. The slide that's missing here is kind of one of a brick wall, because that's kind of how we were introduced to the problem of digital equity. Like I mentioned, we had a great infrastructure finally. We had devices out. Teachers were adjusting practice with professional development. We had instructional resources. And I started getting emails from students, and they would be something like, well, I'm using Canvas, but my dad got laid off and we had to turn off our internet, or my family has never had internet at home. And so how do I do my homework now? And so I should mention a little bit about Beaverton. We're just outside of Portland. We're about 40,000 students. Beaverton is the home of Nike, and Intel is right next door. And so you would think we would have a pretty engaged and affluent community. And that's the case, but there are also extreme poverty, I think, in our city, especially in the middle of our city and not on the north and south ends. And so this digital equity really came at us through students advocating for themselves and saying, I want to learn, I've got these tools, and they're not, my experience is just not the same as others. And so out of that reality for us, we began taking a look at digital equity, and it really started with one of our teacher on special assignment leaders, a gentleman by the name of Matt Highfield, who in addition to teaching, is working in the office of equity and inclusion. And his idea was, let's just assemble a team of people who are passionate, who see the issue and can start to dream and envision and plan ways to tackle this problem. And so he very wisely just created a brown bag, is what we called it, a digital equity brown bag, where groups of teachers and librarians, teaching and learning staff, IT staff, who could come and just talk about ways that we could start meeting the needs of students that did not have home internet access. CoSN had some great resources at the time. The Digital Equity Toolkit, which Susan mentioned, was a resource. And so we started looking out into other districts. And so, the great thing about our community, our technology community here, is that we learn and share from each other, and share with each other. And so for us, a lot of the things we did were just great ideas that came from our colleagues throughout the country. So if you want to move forward to the next slide. So the first year, we just started small. And these are all things that were mentioned in other places. The Digital Equity Toolkit mentions them. But for example, one of the things we did was our schools had ideas of reaching out to local businesses and asking them, we've got students that don't have access. Can you create a welcoming environment for them to do their homework? And surprisingly, a number of student businesses said, yes, we're going to welcome our students in. And so what you see before you there is just a community Wi-Fi map, where one of our middle schools could share this with their students, and the students knew where to go. And that was a great idea that reached out into the community, engaged our partners and our stakeholders, and started to make transparent this problem. If you want to move forward, Marcy, the next solution we had, one of the solutions was extending library hours. And so our libraries, as I mentioned, we had a robust technology infrastructure. So we thought, well, we're going to keep the libraries open longer, create safe places for students to go. And then go forward, Marcy, next slide. And then finally, another one of our examples was parent nights, specifically reaching into our Latino tech parent nights, where schools opened their doors and brought parents in and had resources for parents to talk about how important technology was to the students, what we're doing. We opened our labs so parents could get exposed to the parent portal for the first time. They could actually, so it was more than just we have a problem about students not having access at home, it was really reaching out and engaging with the entire family on how important digital citizenship and technology was to their students and their student learning. So if you want to move forward, next slide. So that was year one, and they were great ideas. And we made some great progress, I think, in terms of the team did, in terms of just starting the conversation in the district and out into the community about the problems. Our problems were greater, though, and couldn't be solved just by those strategies. And so what we did in year two, we started to seek larger scale solutions. And so, the reason we had to do that was, even though we had these great solutions, our students still, that didn't have internet at home, they still had to travel. And here in the Northwest, winters can be particularly, maybe not as bad as some across the country, but they're challenging for students. It's not a safe environment for them. Transportation for students who needed to get internet was a challenge. So we started as a team looking at what we could do on a larger scale to address needs. Coincidentally, we learned through CoSN about two wonderful partnerships. And the first was the 1 Million Project. And we were really fortunate to be awarded that grant. And that was targeted at our high schools. And then the next one was the Khajiit Homework Gap Grant. And we focused the Khajiit grant at middle schools because this really was a secondary problem. It's not just high school students who need it. In fact, we are seeing now with the advent of digital resources, elementary students can continue their learning at home. And we need to ensure that even elementary students, down to the elementary level, they have that level of access. And so the team began working on the grant applications. It was time consuming, and it should have been time consuming given the level of investment from our partners. And so we took that very seriously. We wanted to be accountable to doing this well. And one of the great outcomes of this work was that as we began to deploy hotspots, the schools and the students got involved, and we worked very carefully not to make this about a poverty issue. But the focus was that all means all. And so digital transformation was for all students and not just those with internet at home. So that really helped set the tone and the culture for us. If you advance the slide, Marcy, that brings us kind of to today. We are still continuing to learn as a team. Just some parting words of learning from our group, I would say, is as you look at, as we looked at reaching out into larger scale solutions and engaging with partners, you have to take the grant management aspect of that very seriously. Don't underestimate that. Our partners have invested a lot in us, and they want to see returns. And so we monitor closely usage and deployment of these hotspots, for example, and schools that are not deploying them, they're sitting on a shelf, they come back, and we redeploy into schools that have higher needs. So that takes time, and it takes people, and it's important work. But that's part of success is that we've seen is to make sure that we're paying attention to not only just getting devices for students, but ensuring that through the whole process, students are able to get internet access when they need it, and devices don't just sit on the shelf. Policies, this is kind of backward for us, but as we started talking about this, we realized we really didn't have policies or procedures that talked about expectations of access and how that related to instructional resources and curriculum. And so the group's been taking a look at that and work as well. And then finally, the parent engagement, that's not a one and done, as we all know. That's something that we have to continue to reach out into our community and with this conversation and bring them into the conversation. So one thing that we're just starting to look at is how schools are using these devices. So we're starting to analyze what does usage look like at schools, and are there different patterns based on the socioeconomic makeup of schools? And so that's some intriguing work that we've just began, and we're wondering if there are differences, is it because of teacher training? Are there beliefs underlying that we need to address? And so that's kind of our next phase of work, is to really tackle, now that the tools are out, now that students, have support, does usage look different? And I do want to end just by saying we have not solved this issue. It's way too large for us to solve. We are making dents in it, but it is going to be ongoing area of focus for us. And so with that, that's a bit about our journey here in Beaverton.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Steve. And I do see we have several terrific questions coming up in the chat box, and we will have some time at the end of the session to ask those of our presenters. So we're going to move on now to Diane Dorsch from Green Bay, who's going to talk about how they've addressed the homework gap in her school district.
Hi, everybody. It's Diane from the frozen tundra of Green Bay, Wisconsin, and it's not frozen yet. It's in the 60s today. I want to remind you, well, first of all, thank you for joining us. And if we take a look at the ISTE Standards for Educational Leaders, you can see that there is an essential part of leadership, which is making sure that we've got technology and connectivity necessary for learning. And so I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. Marcy, if you could click, please. Thank you. I just want to give a quick overview of what we've got going on. I call it the Ninja deployment. We actually now have all our secondary students with Chromebooks. We moved from a laptop cart model, and I think you all know and love that one, right? Where devices are in carts in classrooms, and students go get the laptop out of the cart, log in, do their work, put the laptop into the cart, go to the next classroom, get another laptop out, etc. We were finally last year able to move out of that laptop cart model into a one-to-one deployment. I call it the Ninja deployment because we have 4 high schools, and we said we're going to deploy 1 device per student. You figure out how you're going to make that work. I just want to point out that the laptop cart model probably takes about 20% more of your inventory because you have to stock each cart for the largest class who's going to be using that cart, right? And so moving to the one-to-one model seemed to be helpful. What we found, because we kept saying we're deploying one-to-one now, you decide how to make it work. It was schools who came to us and said, can you let us go to the one-to-one model where students carry their devices from class to class? And maybe they park it, if they're middle school, maybe they park it in a classroom overnight and then come and pick it up again in the morning. And then other schools wanted their school to go one-to-one. I guess I want to point out what I call Ninja deployment, because you hear often, school districts saying, hey, everyone's going one-to-one and we're going to brand it and we're going to, get our community involved in all those types of things. We kind of chose to go the other way because we want to make sure that our building leaders and our teachers took ownership of that deployment in their school. And so we waited for them to come to us to say, hey, can we do this? We made sure all conditions were right so that this transition could be made. We have tech integrators. They helped with that transition. And I'm happy to say that now we do have many of our high schools, all our high schools are one-to-one, and our secondary schools, our middle schools also, some are going to that parking lot model where 7th hour they will return their device to a cart and then they'll pick it up in the morning. They call them the Chrome rooms. Get it? Like a homeroom, Chrome room. So I thought that was pretty cool. So we are at one-to-one at the secondary, and then at our elementary, we've got a combination of things, iPads, Chromebooks, and we're at about 1.5 students to one device. I talk about equity in this case because we want equity between schools. We say that we have a baseline, and this is what our district will provide to all our schools, because all does mean all. But remember that we also have schools who might receive additional funding. And so we always say, okay, we're going to buy you the baseline, and we're taking responsibility for that, but then you are in charge of buying those things that go beyond the baseline. So I just wanted to bring that forward to you because you know, that might be a way for you to think as you deploy within your district. Click. Thank you. I have to say with this, within my district, I'm not allowed to endorse a product. And you heard Steve talk about some different solutions. We know that Verizon or Sprint has solutions. I'm going to be talking about the Kajit Smart Spot solution in this. What I find when I talk with other leaders is that people say, what are the nuts and bolts? How do you really make this work? We so often talk at the very high level about things, but we don't get down to the details. And so that's why I'm hoping to share with you today. We do have Kajits. We've got 1,000 of them in our school district that we check out, and I'll be talking to you about that in a moment. But you know, we started that and made those purchases in 2014, 2015. And now since then, we also are looking forward, and we're doing some experimental options with TV white space and LTE as well. Click. Thank you. So here's Green Bay by the numbers. We've got about 21,150 students, and you know, we do have families that move around as well, so those numbers go up and down through time. Our free and reduced lunch is at about 60%, and we've got 40 schools. So that's kind of a snapshot of our school district. Click. Here is our strategic framework. We really talk about our value of equity and engagement and excellence. And you can see our 4 different strategic plans or points that we have out there in our framework as well. Click. I'm going to give you this link. I'll put it when I'm done talking. I'll put it down in the chat so you can get to this. It's kind of in a nutshell a bit about our Smart Spot program. I have to say this was done in 2015, so you're going to see netbooks in it. Okay, we no longer use netbooks, but I will share that with you in the chat when I'm done speaking. Click. I wanted to talk to you about how we chose to go with this option of a smart spot in the first place. This is what things looked like in 2015. And we knew that we had more classrooms using digital and online resources. And so we knew that we wanted to make sure that we provided the infrastructure and access for our students to have have these resources, not just at school, but at home as well, so that we can modernize their learning experience. Click. And so we chose the Kajit, and we did that because, well, here were our options. We could choose not to provide access at home, and we could choose to provide maybe hotspots from other providers, but they would be unfiltered, which really scared the bejeebers out of me. And then let's see, the last one, can't quite read that. Oh, and so we decided to provide Kajits. Click. And so why did I like the Kajits, and why did we in Green Bay choose it? Notice filtered appears here 3 times. I know that there are other solutions now where you can actually kick back your students to your firewall within your school district, but really at that time, what I was interested in solutions that could come right out of the box. And what I liked about this was that I could purchase a managed service as well regarding managing the filtering, and I could pay for them lump sum. I wouldn't have monthly bills and all those types of things. So click. Other things that I liked, was that it was easy for our students to use. We could turn off service, although we never chose to, because I haven't seen a need to turn them off during times when students should be sleeping. This was an opportunity to help our students understand about data use and how to use data for the good of learning. And so when there's a limited cap on the data that they use, that helps and is a skill for students to use. It comes with a dashboard, and that's what I really like about the solution that we chose, because I can go to that and see what are students attempting to get to that they can't, thank goodness, and then what are they looking at and what are they using, because that helps us understand what and when as well. More about, do we need to get more professional learning out to our teachers so that they're providing these resources? Should we put a link of resources or a QR code into the little Kajeet holder when we send it home so kids can scan that and get to a list of resources that we approve? How could we do this? And so I really do like that dashboard. And then it's managed by Kajeet. And so that frees up our very valuable network engineer time as well. Click. So here are some other things as to why we made the choice to just make sure that we provide learning for our students outside the school day and school walls. It allowed us to differentiate data conservation, small enough to send home with kids without making a big deal, because like Steve said, we do not want to make this an issue, a poverty issue. Sometimes, it's a kid going to grandma's for the weekend and grandma doesn't have internet at home. So, there are many ways to use this. Click. So, back in December 2013, we actually had tech integrators drive around town with the smart spot in their car, and iPads, Chromebooks, MacBooks, and try these smart spots out in different areas of Green Bay. I have had recalled tech integrators driving around in the sleet and snow to make sure that we had coverage. And that was something that we wanted to make sure we had before we made a purchase like this. Click. And then the next thing that we did is we laid the groundwork. It took a lot of professional learning for the people who would be supporting our students. And so we used the train the trainer model. Our technology integrators and the library media specialists are really the boots on the ground who help create this whole process, as well as designed what this looks like and what it will look like as a user experience for our students. So without them, we would not have this successful program. Click. And so what we did was we trained the staff, we brought everybody in for the train the trainer model, and we really worked people through troubleshooting as well. How do you use it with this and that device? What are kids going to be up against when they bring this and they say they've run out of data? What how do you talk to them about that? All those types of things. So we laid the groundwork. Click. And then also we made sure at the open houses that take place right before school starts that we made it known that, hey, parents, there are options here so that your child can have access at home. We actually, before we went one-to-one, made sure that we had devices, checkout devices, laptops in the library, as well as our smart spots, and then resources in multiple languages. Here's another hint that I got from one of our library media specialists. Note that bag has our logo on it, Green Bay Area Public Schools. That school asked for unmarked bags because kids did not want to check out our devices with that on there, because then kids would know that maybe that kid didn't have a computer at home. So I wanted to bring that up because I thought, definitely voice from our students, just like Steve had talked about, students advocating for themselves, that helped us get to where we're at now. Click. And another thing that we've done is we've provided materials online, because we heard from many schools who said, hey, wait, how do you really do this? Like, what are your nuts and bolts plans? What does your spreadsheet look like for checkout? What does a parent permission slip look like? And so I do have a folder of public materials. Again, I'll be ready to share that with you, or some documents with you in the chat when I'm done speaking. Because again, some of these things are the things that, you know, that it takes time to create. So if you can not reinvent the wheel, I think it would be helpful. Click. So here's what we did. We got permission slips signed by parents. We had originally asked for teacher recommendations, and then we had a process where students went to the library at the end of the day and got their devices. We found through, again, teacher and student voice, and note, we started this in 2013, it's 2018 now, so this process has been around a while, but this was a cumbersome process. We still keep this going for our elementary students, but for our secondary students, we have treated now our smart spots like a book or anything else that students check out from the library. So keep that in mind too, because you don't want your checkout process to be cumbersome. Click. And when we started doing this, again, it was kind of early, 2013, 2014. I do recall, we would hear a lot, school districts are trying to solve this problem. And so we kind of jumped in. People said, well, are you using title funds for that? Are you using funds this or that for that? I've been with Green Bay now for 6 years, and I made this a line item budget having to do with internet. We've got multiple, we've got our wide area network internet, we've got different types of internet, and so I just count this as a line item within our budget, and that's how we pay for it. Click. So here are a couple case studies that you'll find out there if you look us up, and this one was actually put out by Kajit, and click. And it's interesting because, our legislators ask us, they do a listening tour and they go around and they ask school districts, what do you need? Well, for me as a technologist, what do you think I'm going to say? Please click. I will always say, needs more bandwidth. And, it's interesting because we are finding that, as times change within our schools, we do definitely need more bandwidth. We've gone from a 1 gig pipe to a 10 gig pipe, creating our own wide area network and upgrading things thanks to E-rate, because we have to have that infrastructure there to support our students. Your end devices are no good unless you have a strong infrastructure. Click. And so, we do have our goal, equitable access. We need, just like Steve talked about, we need to have good professional development and also that true transformation taking place. And click. So we know that we all need to work together, and it's going to improve the quality of life for all. So thank you very much. I'll add my links now.
Thank you, Diane. And now we will move on to Rob with Omaha Public Schools, who's going to share their digital equity efforts in the mobile learning unit.
Yeah. So my name's Rob Dixon. I've been in charge of instructional technology and technology here in Omaha. I moved up here, I want to say, almost 5 years ago. And around that time, we started a new strategic plan. But I'd say probably one of the biggest things that happened was a perfect storm. In November of 2014, and Steve and Diane have talked about this a little bit, modernization of E-rate happened, but also we passed the largest bond issue in Nebraska history. So we're 20% of the state's kids, and that first year that we passed that $421 million bond, we took total advantage of E-rate the entire state was 2.8 million that first year, and we were 2.1 million of that. So as we progressed, and here this last May, we passed a second bond of $410 million. Those things have produced resources for us to be able to address some things. But many of the key aspects that you'll see in this digital equity and access were a part of community efforts and as well as partnerships with companies. So along our strategic plan, we did put in place a planned obsolescence of device strategy. I had done some research and took some models from the Center for Digital Education around digital, moving that digital curriculum piece and looking at themes of devices rather than one device for an entire district. So if you know Omaha Public Schools, you know there's not a magnet theme we don't love. We give lots of school choice. And in that, it was tough to define some requirements that would meet the needs of all of those magnet themes. So we built 6 themes. I'm placing a link out there right now that goes through our whole transformation story. So you can look at how we've, transformed access, transformed schools, transforming classrooms, and then transforming that story. But looking at all the systemic things that we had to put around that, whether it be an app approval tool or looking at digital citizenship and literacy, a lot of those things were both partnerships with companies as well as community relationships. So first, I want to talk about digital literacy and citizenship. We have a Common Sense Media person here full-time. Her name's Keegan Korf. She works for both Common Sense Media and the district and is funded partly through philanthropic work. If you've ever been in Omaha, you know that Warren Buffett lives here. A lot of the things that he and his colleagues have done in Omaha philanthropically are amazing. 75 North is a revitalization project of North Omaha. It's a $98 million revitalization effort. And so our turnaround model schools were initially part of that. Those were very, 100% free and reduced schools. And we're, going in there with a mobile learning unit that was actually funded through a public service commission grant, which can't be applied in Nebraska from a school district. It had to be applied for through a company that was a provider. So we partnered with Cox and they helped write this grant. And I had found a bus and we renovated it. There's a video out there that I can send, but through that Public Service Commission grant, we were able to renovate a bus, make a flexible learning space, and then through the use of Keegan and Rebecca Chambers, who actually is our instructional technology facilitator on the bus, go out through the North Omaha community and provide digital citizenship and literacy to parents and students. And so as we've done planned obsolescence, which originally came from a model that I took from a school district in Texas, that we provided Surface devices to all teachers year 1, then to students, then to elementary teachers, then to students. As we've done that planned obsolescence strategy, we've really focused on digital literacy and citizenship to parents and students after hours using this mobile learning unit. And the devices were provided from Microsoft. It's been a great partnership so far. Cox provides all the internet access through that grant for 5 years on that bus. So we've started year 2 on that bus, and it's been great. I think it's everybody always says that they see that thing going around. So it's great, just as telling our story through that partnership. So next slide. And so our second process is, through those themes, many of our buildings are 1-to-1, many of them take them home. Some of the key things that we had to work with was even working with our police department to identify areas that wouldn't be safe for the mobile learning unit to go at specific times, or even as kids take those devices home, worrying about, are they safe taking these devices home? So we worked on that and are working with our chamber to identify some areas, if we're not providing internet through that device, then they have access to a business that has free Wi-Fi that's willing to participate in a certification program that would identify it's a safe place for students to go to do their homework and things throughout the city. So we're still working on that interactive map right now with the chamber. I anticipate that actually came from Forsyth County in Georgia that we got that idea from. Another one is we're focused on our middle schools. That is a Verizon Innovative Schools and Digital Promise partnership. It's an iPad 1-to-1 with data plans, 5 gig a month for every for our middle schools, and we're deploying those out right now. What I love about that plan is it deploys professional development. Initially, as we did planned obsolescence back in 2014, we engaged with Microsoft. Great partner with Microsoft. They do a lot of professional development in our district. We do have 200 Microsoft Innovative Educators in our district. That's 2 for every building, and they supply training to their buildings. And many products were developed here out of Microsoft through our partnership. Microsoft Teams was developed out of Omaha Public Schools. And so that mechanism of the MIE program that they meet 6 times a year has developed a lot of great things for our district, and as well as many others out there. Modern Groups and Office was developed out of here. So I think, for our kids, and as we look at that, I think that digital citizenship and literacy, and I can't emphasize enough bringing parents where they understand where those students are come from, and understand how to engage their kids. Because many times I'd sit on that bus and listen to parents, and they would just want to know, what is this app? I see my son on this app. How do I engage with him or her? And so a lot of it's just teaching awareness of those families of how they can engage with those kids, because many times those kids already have cell phones, and you just, in order to have great family communication and have that, I think it's important to have that awareness of what's happening in there. And so that's really all I have. If anybody has any questions, like I said, you can reach me at ShowMeRob on Twitter. You can also check out our site, transformation.ops.org, and that's it.
Terrific, Rob. Thank you so much. And now we have time for questions, and we have had lots of questions coming up in the chat. This is terrific. Thank you so very much. And I've seen that, Diane, you've been jumping in and answering a few of them. I'm just going to go back. We had several questions during Steve's presentation. The first question was, how are you sustaining your devices when you are using grant monies?
Yeah, that's a great question. For us, we have put a line item, like Diane mentioned, a line item into our budget. We are, victims of boom and bust cycles in Oregon. And so that for us is going to have to be something at an organizational level. If we value this, then it needs to persist. And it can't continue indefinitely upon us just finding grants and partners, although we're going to continue in that work. But yeah, that is a concern, and something the group's going to have to work on is how do you integrate this into your operation of your district so this becomes an expectation. I wish I could say we've solved it.
And Steve, what percentage of your student population didn't have home internet access? Yeah,
I saw that question. I was afraid to answer it because I'm going to have to confess that we didn't ask that question very well. So this was one of our learnings is we started to survey students and started to ask them, do you have home internet? That for us wasn't a question on our student survey that yielded good data, because that could be, does home internet mean my family shares one cell phone and that's internet access? So we had to retool that question into, do you have adequate, and the group's working on that. I don't have the numbers in front of me, although I can tell you they're greater than our ability to meet the needs right now. But we're having to dig into the survey questions so that they're at a different level than just asking, do you have internet access? But really get down to, what does that mean? Are you sharing one computer with all your siblings? Are you sharing a hotspot off of a phone, or even sharing a phone? And so I don't have the numbers on that, but I can tell you they're greater than our need right now.
And Steve, you make a great point about asking the right questions. The CoSN Digital Equity Toolkit that I mentioned earlier in the presentation does have a sample survey that schools and districts can customize to try and ferret out that information. That's available at cosn.org/DE Toolkit. And I agree that can be difficult to ferret that information out. Another strategy is that I believe it's Fairfax County Public Schools. They send out the survey questions at the start of the school year when everybody has to fill out all of their mandatory paperwork. So it's just something else that they have to fill out. So that way they get that information and it's not like they're trying to send it out mid-year and trying to capture that information, but they're getting it at a time when everybody's filling out paperwork anyway. So that's another potential option. Another question for you, Steve, and you can. This was partially answered in the chat, I think. How are you providing SIPA compliance to non-district devices? SIPA compliant filtering.
Oh, so the hotspots go home with a Chromebook, and the Chromebooks are filtered. So we do filter the Chromebooks off-site, and so they are filtered. The Khajiits also have filtering, and we filter. So there's multiple filtering levels in there to meet SIPA.
Excellent. And then we had one question, and I think you had talked about some of the policies that you have in your district, and someone asked if you can share some of your policies that you've created.
Yeah, I can put a link in. We've got an equity policy. We are in discussions about how to infuse the digital aspect into that. And for those of you who in districts who have worked through this trying to create a equity policy, it can be challenging sometimes as you bring school boards in to educate them, get them to understand the need, and get them to see how digital equity fits into the context of equity as well. But I can certainly go and grab some of our work. It is incomplete. I wish we have solved this, but it's very much a journey for us.
Great. And one more question. This was a good one. How do you address those households with multiple students? Do you provide them with multiple hotspots?
I should know the answer to that. I can't remember if we do. I do believe it's at the student level. So yeah, I think it is at the student level. Students can check out the hotspots are checked out to a student.
Same with us in Green Bay.
Terrific. And then Diane, another question that came up after your presentation was, what do you do in areas where cell coverage for families is insufficient because all areas have their dead zones, especially rural and suburban areas?
Right. Well, we have family engagement coordinators who are working similar to what Steve did in finding out, where some public access places, because all our students now have devices. So, can they go to the library? Can they go to, a coffee shop or those types of things? I know that in some areas, businesses have been identified for that, but that is definitely something now that we've saturated our schools with devices that are going home. That's kind of on our next step, is to make sure that our students know where they can get that type of access.
Excellent. And there's also a question, do you know off the top of your head how much your hotspot deployment program is costing? I know Michael Flood had mentioned some cost information about the Khajiit hotspots.
Sure. No, I don't. I should have looked that up before I I joined today, but I didn't. I know that's a very popular question. When compared to other hotspots, it was very reasonable, especially for the managed service.
Excellent. And I had Silva had also asked a question about implementing private 4G networks in a city. I know, Dan, I know you've done some research into this. Can you share some of the challenges that you faced?
Well, I
listed
the EBS thing as being educational broadband spectrum, maybe.
Yes.
And here's what I found. We saw, because there's a place to search, your local area to see if there are any educational channels available. And we have like our Cooperative Education Service Agency or local technical or colleges have the EBS. But what I found is that they're leasing them out long term. And so I can't get them. And I do believe maybe they just didn't know what to do with them. And so they said, we'll lease them. It's a money generator. And so it's been very difficult. But we did get a grant from Wisconsin Public Service, and we did use it for those 2 projects I talked about. And with the help of an LTE provider, I was able to get a temporary license. And so we're using that for our proof of concept. So I believe if you have some providers around who provide LTE, if you can work with them, you may find solutions.
And also in the DigitalEquity Toolkit, one of the districts that we highlight is the Albemarle district in Virginia, which did deploy their own networks using the education EBS spectrum. So that's, you may want to, Ira Sokol is their technology leader, and that's Albemarle in Virginia. So you may want to reach out to them. And I don't know if I can share his email address, but I know he's on Twitter, and he may be able to provide some additional information on that from a practical perspective. And terrific. Well, we are just about at 1 hour at this point. So I just wanted to first remind everybody of the upcoming CoSN conference and Vision 2030, which will be in Portland, Oregon this year. And that's on April 1 through 4 of this coming spring. So please consider joining us at the CoSN conference. We will have some homework gap and digital equity related sessions, along with lots of other sessions of interest to school technology leaders. Also, just to let you know of some upcoming events that we have with CoSN. We have our next webinar is, as part of our webinar series, is cybersecurity, protecting student cyber and physical security. That's on October 17th from 1 to 2. We also have the Missouri CTO Clinic coming up in November, and another webinar coming up in November on the screen time debate, which I know is something that I'm sure many people have had questions about in their districts. So if you check the links that are on the screen, you can learn more about our webinar series and also our statewide CTO clinics. And of course, CoSN wants to thank our corporate partners who help make our resources possible for our members. So be sure to give these folks a shout out. We are very appreciative of their financial support and helping make all of this information possible. So thank you so much for attending today. Terrific, Steve. Thank you for putting your email in the chat. And also, I think Rob mentioned and I can also add my Twitter handle. I'm at @S_Bearden on Twitter. I'm CoSN's Digital Equity Project Director, in addition to being the Chief Information Officer. So please, let's keep the digital equity conversations going and continue to share best practices with one another. And thank you all for coming to today's webinar.